Chapter 2 Choices in Life. A year after Alex died, I fell in love with the Heroinwena, which is a nickname for a heroine. Heroinwena became a very possessive, demanding, and jealous mistress that would consume and control my life for the next 22 years. In addition to doing heroin, I was also drinking a lot of alcohol, smoking marijuana, using angel dust or super cools, which are drugs, and whatever else was available. I was still hurting from the betrayal of Cassie, my first love, and by the death of Alex. I felt mad and mean. With the drugs, I knew I was headed for trouble, but I didn't even care. I felt I could do or say whatever I wanted as long as I could be kicking it, enjoying life 7 days a week. I started chipping, shooting heroin with a couple of homeboys, which were my buddies. When I started using drugs, I thought it would be easy to stop. I thought that I was in control and I could stop at any time. I started out using heroin once in a while on the weekends. That lasted about 2 months. It then turned into once a day, then 2 times a day, and even 3 times a day at $25 a fix. At that time, I had a job packing nuts, but I lost it for nodding off on the machine and lagging on the job. By this time, I was 21 years old and spent much of my time strung out under the influence of drugs and alcohol. If I missed one fix, I became desperate. When I only had half a fix for a day or two, I would be in bad shape. I would get severe stomach cramps, chills, cold sweats, dizziness, vomiting, runny nose, and my body would shake uncontrollably. When I started using drugs, I thought it would be easy to stop, but it wasn't. Instead, I used more and more drugs. I then started to fix 2 or 3 times per week for several months. Soon my addiction controlled my entire life. Now everything I did revolved around getting my next fix or finding the money to buy the next fix. I figured out that the best way to keep myself supplied was to know one of the dealers that was willing to work with me. They would buy stolen goods from me and then turn around and sell them on the street at street prices. Dealers are hustlers. They will sell anything. I stole and sold goods to support my addiction to drugs and alcohol. I hooked up with an ex-con named George. He had been in prison for 13 years for armed robbery and was now out of prison doing 10 years of parole. I started dating George's sister, and the 3 of us started doing burglaries as a team. It wasn't easy breaking into homes and carrying out the television sets and VCRs, so we mostly took money and guns. We always checked between the bed frames and in the cookie jars. After a while, when I didn't have money, he would keep me supplied, gave me free drugs anyway. Things were going pretty good, at least I thought they were, but my homie, my buddy, told me that he couldn't keep supplying my habit and that I had to come up with some way to make more money. I asked him if he had any ideas. Any ideas, he said. We did get this .38 snub-nose gun during the last burglary. You can have it. That right there will get you all you want. Now tell me, don't you have any ideas yet? I started planning for something big, but I needed some help. It wasn't easy to find someone I could trust not to snitch on me or get me caught. So I started holding up people when they were alone at ATM machines. I always kept my gun ready and loaded all the time. Locking it was not a good idea. I thought if I was going to carry a gun, it had to be ready to kill or be killed. I was always stoned on weed and heroin. I didn't care much about anything except my daily dose. Much of my dependency on drugs was because of my having lost my ex-girlfriend. I had her around for 5 years, and now I didn't see her at all. It's just that I didn't know that it was going to hurt me so much. Her rejection of my love made me heartless and mean. I was out of control when I started to do robberies. One day, I put a gun in someone's face, not caring that the gun was loaded and that I might have to shoot or kill them. At that time, I never thought what would happen to me. I never thought, what if I get caught and have to go to prison? If so, for how long? My first big robbery job was a gas station. It was a waste of time. I only stole $200, which bought me enough drugs to last me just 2 days. So I tried a bigger mobile gas station. At the gas station, all I had to do was show the .38 barrel and say, "This is a holdup. Give me all your money." After the attendant emptied out the cash register, I had only 6 to 8 minutes to get to my car because the burglar alarm would go off. I had my car parked down the street, around the corner and out of sight. Well, I got less money there than I did in the first gas station. I then started getting sick to my stomach because I couldn't afford my habit. So the next morning, I hit a Circle K market. These hits were not worth the effort. I thought if I had help, I would be able to get to the vault in the floor. By this time, it was almost Christmas. My parents had gone to Mexico City for the holidays. My sisters were going out on dates with their boyfriends, and I was going to hang out with my homie, my special friend, Happy. The dealer, George, his girlfriend, my new mistress of a year and a half, Edwina, and Happy were all together. Happy was my road dog. We hung out together a lot. At age 25, he had been injured in action while in the army during the Vietnam War. That was the war that nobody won. He showed me pictures that he had brought back illegally with people blown up into pieces, Vietnamese and Americans. Most of the time, he told me he had nightmares that he was in a ditch eating opium leaves and smoking weed. He said that everyone there smoked weed. While he was there, he was shot in the back of his thigh and received an honorable discharge for being wounded in action. He would have to walk with a cane for the rest of his life. Early that day, Happy, George, his girlfriend, and we were drinking white port wine and lime juice. We also had 6 barbiturate pills, better known as Rainbows, Lilies, F-44s. Happy took 3 and I took the other 3. We were all at George's pad. George gave me a look that said, "Follow me into the bedroom." He offered me a fix, and like always, I never turned it down. Then he asked me if we should give Happy some of the drugs. I guess he noticed how effed up Happy was, and we both agreed that he wouldn't give Happy any more drugs. At least that's what I understood. I went back to sit down and noticed it was still daytime, and then it seemed that all of a sudden it was almost dark. I don't know how long I was there. I was sitting on a long couch with the arm made of wood. I guess I started to pass out because I slid to my right side and hit the right side of my face on the wooden arm of the couch. George said it was a pretty good blow because my eye became really swollen. By now it was nighttime. The lights in the house were off, but I could see a little by the light of the moon. I looked over to the recliner where Happy was sitting, and I called out to him 3 or 4 times, but he never answered me. Finally, I got up to turn the light on. He sat there with his mouth open as if he were gasping for air. He was turning cold and he felt stiff. I checked his breathing. There was none. There was no time to call the ambulance. We couldn't call the police, otherwise they would take us to jail because they would be able to tell that we'd been using drugs. Now the dealer and his girlfriend did not want anything to do with this. I thought the only chance my road dog had was to drive him to the hospital. George and his girlfriend were so effed up, they could not help me do anything. I dragged Happy down from the 2nd-story apartment building. I threw him into the car so hard that he hit his head on the other side of the car, which I didn't mean to happen. Then I closed the door. As I was doing this, they were both looking down at me through the kitchen window. I looked up and said, "You better hope he makes it." I left it like that because I didn't have time to argue. I was effed up myself and in no shape to drive, but I headed to the hospital since I figured I was the only hope Happy had to make it. Then I noticed I was going in the wrong direction, so I turned around and headed into the opposite direction. After I got back on track, I finally arrived to the hospital. I ran into the emergency room saying that I found this person on the street. They took him into the examining room and escorted me into the waiting room. The doctor came back in less than 5 minutes and told me that Happy had died even before we had gotten to the hospital. 2 officers walked in behind the doctor. I was handcuffed and put into a squad car. They wanted to know what had happened. I couldn't tell the truth because there were others involved, so I had to think of something to tell them other than the truth. First, they ran a check for warrants, so that gave me a good hour to come up with something that would be more believable. I kept it short. I told them that I was up in the south part of town with some homeboys. I was in my car going home. It was about 2 a.m. and I saw this guy zigzagging on the street. And as I got closer, I noticed that I knew this guy, but not very well. All of a sudden, I saw his face hit the pavement. I pulled over, and when I could not get him to wake up, I put him in the backseat of my car. When I arrived at his pad, there was no one home. I was going to sit him on the chair outside his house. However, I realized that this guy looked so bad, I thought it would be better if I took him to the hospital instead. The cop asked me a couple of questions. He knew I was under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I was sitting in the back of the squad car. I could see the 2 officers talking, but they were too far away and I couldn't make out what they were saying. After a while, one of the officers came to me and asked me to get out of the car. He asked me to turn around and he took the handcuffs off. He said, "I'm glad that you made the right choice and brought your friend here. Most people get scared and dump the bodies wherever they can. I'm gonna let you go. Just be careful and try not to end up like your friend here. We hope we don't find you left by your homies out in the street, overdosed. Now, I asked myself, why didn't I die instead of Happy? I couldn't figure out why I didn't die that night, especially since I found out later that I had done more drugs than Happy did that night he died. We both should be dead, or we both should be alive. The only answer that I could come up with is that a higher power, which I believe now to be Jesus Christ, had something to do with it, or I was the luckiest addict on earth. At about the same period of time, I remember I was taking a nap in the backseat of my friend's car. I was high on something and knocked out. When I woke up, I noticed bullet holes next to my head that were shot into the seat. Those suckers missed me by inches. This is another time my life was spared. In 1973, we had a lot of parties at Casper's Pad. That's the summer when there were several shootings by two rival gangs in the San Gabriel Valley. One was from the city of Pomona, and the other was from where I was living in Rosemead, right up the street from my home. By this time, some of the homies, gang members, were buying cars, lowriders with hydraulic lifters and chrome rims. They were all fixed up and looking cool. One of the members bought a car, a nice 1969 Rivera. We were all hanging out around East Los Angeles College. It was the night of the Battle of the Bands. All of a sudden, one of the homies said, "Isn't that the car that you just bought?" We stood there looking to make sure that it was the 1969 Riviera that was supposed to be in the college parking lot. Before we could react, the car disappeared down the street and around the corner. On Sunday, at our Animal Tribe meeting, we discussed the 1969 Riviera that was stolen from the college. We all had a strong feeling that we know who had stolen the car. 2 days later, the car was found in East Los Angeles. It was stripped of everything from the body and the frame. The following Sunday at our meeting, we declared war on the East Los Angeles Car Club. They were more like a gang than a car club. We started vandalizing, stealing, and removing car blocks. Things became pretty hot. We had to watch our backs constantly. When we partied, we stayed in the middle of the block and had lookouts on both ends of the street. We signaled with flashlights to communicate if we didn't recognize a car or if they looked like someone that did not belong there. It was a very hot summer in August of 1973. It was about 11 p.m. and most of us were kicking it in the front of Casper House under a big pine tree. We were drinking beer and wine and smoking pot. A couple of homies had took some acid. We were listening to the radio. I was sitting under the tree drinking some of the cheap red wine when I started to think, what if we get hit tonight? We only had one rifle. I walked over to the president of the tribe. We all called him Jefe because he was an Apache Native American Indian. He had long black hair to his shoulders, a big spear nose, and high cheekbones. He was standing with his cousin, who was the vice president. His name was Redskin. I said to them, "Bros, I have an uneasy feeling. It will be a bad time if we get hit right now. We need to go get more hardware, guns." Jefe agreed. "Yes, I think you're right," he said. "We'll go right after I finish my beer." I said, "Okay." Then I went to get myself another beer. Before I knew it, a couple of hours had passed. Everyone was having a good time, including me. Most of us were pretty stoned by that time. All of a sudden, 4 or 5 lowriders drove up to the house. My first thought was that they were coming to the party. Sometimes we had car clubs that had come down to party with us, but as they pulled up and stopped, their doors flung open. It looked like they all had firearms. There were about 10 of them, and this did not include the drivers. Casper reached for his rifle. Most of us carried knives, but that would not help much against a bunch of guns. The smart thing to do would be to run, but we couldn't until Jefe gave the command to stay and fight or to run. We had to hold our ground, waiting for his word. Finally, he gave the command for which we had been waiting. "Run! Get the F out of here!" I thought he would never say the word, but the reason he hesitated was because he had a group of women with us, and we did not know what they might do to them. As for me, I reached for my buck knife, threw it to the enemy, and then ran the other direction. Then all hell broke loose. It sounded like a war. I was running, and as I started to jump the back fence to the other side of the street, I looked on both sides of me, and I saw Jefe on my right and the Vice President Redskin on my left. We all got to the fence at the same time. You could hear the shots hitting the brick wall. Both Jefe and Redskin were hit by buckshot, and they yelled in pain as they fell over the other side of the fence. We ran down the driveway but did not get far. The gang members were attacking us had cars waiting there to pin us down. I was hiding behind a bush, and then all of a sudden, all was quiet, and there was no more shooting. The two cars that had pinned us down drove off burning rubber. It was a very long block. We started to run around to the other side, not too anxious to get to Casper's house, afraid of what we might find. I was hoping that no one was hurt too badly, or even worse, killed. Jason, one of the homies, was missing, and we could not find him. He had been tripping on acid. As I got closer to Casper's pad, I could see someone lying on the ground with a blanket covering their entire body. One of the girls that had stayed behind told me that the body on the ground was Casper's. Casper's girlfriend was there next to his side, crying uncontrollably. She was pregnant with Casper's baby. I remember his funeral at St. Anthony's Church in San Gabriel. The church was packed. Casper's girlfriend was crying and wailing as her parents held her up on each side. Casper's family decided to have an open casket. This brought reality into my life, and I didn't like it. I was very uptight. Another good friend of mine bit the dust for no reason at all. A girl came up to me and said that one of the shooters told her not to ever forget that day and to tell me that I was next. This message really frightened me. After that night, the tribe never again flew their colors, insignia. They wrote graffiti or put plaques anywhere ever again. It was the end of an era. Things were just too hot. The police kept some members underground for their protection. As for the animal tribe, the members merged with the other dudes from the Lomas gang. As for me, I did not get into the Lomas gang right away. By the age of 23, I had lost 4 important people in my life that I thought would be with me forever. My girlfriend Cassie, that I had loved so much, my best friend Happy, my godson Alex, and now Casper. Well, ever since I met Edwin Wena, I knew I could depend on her, especially during times like this. I started working at the auto auction down the street from my parents' house in Rosemead. At that time, I was staying in the back room, which was converted into a garage. I was trying to be a good person and earn money the right way, but my poor work habits and inconsistent work history did not allow me to keep the job for very long. Since I did not pay rent, my father cut off the electricity and water. The back room was just somewhere to crash. My father didn't like people who used drugs of any kind. When he found out I was smoking weed, he did not want anything to do with me. You might say he disowned me. He was very angry with me. There was a lot of fighting and arguing among my parents and me when I would come home loaded on drugs. My dad would start screaming at me, pushing me to get out of his house, and I would physically fight him back. My sister Rosie would jump in between us to get us to stop hitting each other. My mother would be crying, feeling helpless on the other side of the room, watching this sad scenario. On December 22nd, 1973, I decided I was going to rob a bank. When I was 4 or 5 years old, my parents would take me to the bank with them. I remember getting the feeling of, wow, this is where all the money is. Well, on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, I figured that people would be doing their final Christmas shopping, going to the bank. The bank would be full of $100 bills. I knew that I would have about 5 minutes before the tellers realized they were being robbed. I also knew that at closing time there was usually only one guard at the front door. Sometimes the guard stood at the back door, but I needed the back door clear to use in my escape route. My car was going to be parked half a block around the corner out of sight. I really needed to get to the teller on the other side. I decided to scout out the bank, so I went to the bank on December 23rd and looked around at closing time. After I left the bank, I went home to sleep on it. The next day was December 24th. I woke up late and used the last $20 bag of dope that I had left. I knew that to do the best bank job, it really required 2 people. Ideally, I needed someone to be ready and waiting for me with the engine running. But that was not going to happen because the less people that knew about this, the better. I was on my own. Timing was everything. I needed to get to the cashier closest to the back door without having to jump around in the line to attract attention. I got a piece of paper and an envelope. I cut the paper to the shape of a check. On the piece of paper I wrote, "This is a robbery. Start with the hundreds and go down. I will tell you when to stop." I shaved my beard off because I thought it would make me look younger. Without my beard, I did look younger. I took my .38 pistol and shoved it in the front of my pants, and then put on my sweatshirt. I arrived at the bank 30 minutes before closing time. I counted the people waiting in line as well as the cashiers. As I stood in line, I noticed that there was only one security guard in the front door. I had already decided that if there were 2 guards, I would not go through with the bank job. Soon, it was my turn. I walked up with a smile and said hi. "Would you cash this for me?" I took the paper out of the envelope and handed it to her. She looked up at me and said, "What?" I stopped her right there and said, "You're not stupid. You can read." I picked up my sweatshirt and showed her the hand of my .38 pistol. She started with the hundreds, down to the 20s, and then to the 10s. When she got to the 5s, I told her to stop. I picked up the pile of cash and ran out the back door as cool as I could. When I was out the door, I ran across the parking lot into an alley where a car slammed on its brakes, almost hitting me. The car missed me by less than a foot. I ran down the street around the corner and jumped into my car. I had done it. I had robbed my first bank, and I had made a clean escape. I was gone. On the way to my pad, I started to go over what just happened. I was hoping that the camera didn't get a good look at me. I kept looking at the floor, hoping to avoid the security camera. Maybe they only saw a small side of my face. Then it hit me. I had made a big mistake. I forgot the note that I gave the teller with my handwriting and my fingerprints all over it. A mistake like this is what divides the pros from the amateurs. I knew then to expect a visit from the FBI soon. When I arrived at home, I counted the money. It came out to $4,500. That amount of money wasn't too bad considering the time it took. Since I didn't have a partner, I didn't have to worry about someone ratting, snitching on me, and I didn't have to share the money with anyone. I started to worry about the note and the fingerprints I left behind. I decided to call a girlfriend I had been hanging out with to invite her to go to Las Vegas with me until things cooled off. Her name was Doris. She was gorgeous. She looked like a model, and she was from England. I had to tell her the truth because there was no way she would believe that I won the lottery. She would also have to know what she was going to be getting into. She had the right to know. She said that I was crazy to think that she would change her life for a life of crime. She told me that she was a good influence on me and that she was going to change me into a good man. Doris told me she loved me and that she was not going to abandon me. We threw some things in a bag and headed for Las Vegas. I felt like a desperado, with a posse soon on my back. We stayed in Las Vegas for 6 days, gambling and enjoying the entertainment. I believe that Doris loved me and she wanted to change me into a good guy. We became very loaded, and one thing led to the next, and we were married in one of those little Las Vegas wedding chapels. Too soon, the good times ended, and it was time to get back to see if the law was closing in. When we arrived in town, I used the public phone. I couldn't go to my girl's house or to mine until I found out how close the police, were onto me. I called my friend, Crazy Larry. He asked me where I had been. I told him he sounded like my mother and that it wasn't any of his business. I tried to throw him off by telling him that there would be only 2 places he could usually find me, either in jail or with a lady, but I didn't fool him. Crazy Larry told me that I was full of crap. He knew something was up because there were undercover police right across the street from my parents' house. They were keeping a watch on who came and went from my parents' pad. I had known Larry for most of my life. I went to elementary school with him and his brother, so I told him what was up. I broke one of my own rules. I had only been in town for 1 hour and I had told 2 people. I needed a place to lay low during the day. During the night, I would be looking for a way to make some quick money for my next fix. That's all I had been doing. I didn't have time for anything else. My new wife, Doris, was very mad at me and told me that I didn't care about her. But in a way, it wasn't all my fault. I cared a lot about her, but Mistress Edwina was very selfish. If I didn't pay attention to her and give her what she wanted and when she wanted, I would get very sick. If I didn't get my regular fix of heroin, I would get hot and cold sweats, stomach cramps, aching bones, and constipation. Doris and I were only married for a couple of months. She was very bossy and controlling. I think she realized she wasn't going to change me that easily, so she filed for an annulment and returned to England. It was for the best. I loved her in my own way, but I loved Edwina more. I had a friend who was a cool person. Her nickname was Cherry. She was very pretty with long hair. We kind of liked each other. She lived on the other side of the street, almost right in front of my parents' house. I invited her to dinner at 8 p.m. Driving around my car was not a good idea. It was probably on the hot sheet, wanted for a warrant. So I borrowed Crazy Larry's Monte Carlo. I told Cherry the truth about the situation that I was in. I still had $900 from the bank robbery, so I offered to help her pay for her rent if she would keep me from being seen. She agreed to stash me at her place. When I went home with her, I laid in the back seat of her car until we turned into the driveway, and then into the garage that was attached to the house. Everything worked out. I now had a place to stay to lay low for a while. As the police watched my parents' pad, I watched from Cherry's pad. A couple of weeks went by and I was getting short of money. I decided to commit another home burglary, so I had to come up with a nice house that would provide me with a lot of cool stuff to fence. It had to be at night so I would have a better chance of not being recognized. Crazy Larry and I came up with a house that we had been putting off for one reason or another. It was in the city of Diamond Bar. We planned to clean out the house, so Crazy Larry and I borrowed his father's truck. We had the truck almost loaded with television, stereo, and all the valuables we could carry out. We were getting ready to make the getaway. Then all of a sudden we heard a noise. Larry and I ran into the living room windows and looked outside, looked at each other, and then frowned. We had company. A van had just pulled up in front of the house, and a guy came out of the van that was sitting in the front side of the passenger seat. He walked to the front door and went inside the house. Larry and I held our breath, not moving a muscle in hopes of not being discovered. Then we sighed with relief when he turned around and jumped back into the van and took off. I later realized that the men were undercover cops. We didn't know who those guys were, and we were anxious to get out of there and make a quick getaway before anyone came back. We pulled out of the driveway with no car lights on. We made a couple of turns, then I noticed a car light behind us that had not been there a minute ago. Crazy Larry turned around to check it out. He said, "Hey, looks like the white van that was in front of the house." At that time, I made another turn to try and ditch them. Larry added, "And there's also 3 black and whites, cops behind them. Should we make a getaway or are we going to pull over?" I looked at him and he had a big grin on his face. Right then, the lights and the siren went on and we heard the voice over the loudspeaker. "Pull over to the curb." As I was coming to a stop, the van passed us up and made a quick turn in front of us and blocked the front of the truck. The sliding door of the white van flew open and 3 cops that looked like they had been waiting to jump out were holding shotguns and rifles on us. They ordered us out of the car and to lay face down on the sidewalk. On our way to the police station, my mind was running like crazy. When will I see the streets again? When will I see my family again? Will they find out about the robberies I did? Reality was starting to set in. If they find me guilty of these crimes, I was well on my way to the big house, the penitentiary. When we got to the police station, we were booked for burglary, trespassing, and breaking and entering. There was no chance to get out on bail. Before they found another reason to keep me locked up even longer, my old pal Larry snitched on me. They took me to the interrogation room for questioning first. Then they took me to the back of the same cell with Larry. When they took him for questioning, they never brought him back to the same cell that I was in. The next morning after breakfast, the officer called my name for a visit. When I asked him who it was, he said he didn't know. I was thinking that it was too soon for my family to visit, but maybe it was a public defender. Well, I was wrong on both accounts. It was the FBI. The 2 agents showed me their badges. I said to myself, these guys are fast. But now I knew why Larry didn't come back to the same cell. He had ratted me out and was released from jail for all the information he gave the police about me. I introduced myself, and we all had a seat. One of the officers brought out some pictures. He said, "I want you to help us. Look at these pictures to see if you recognize anybody." He showed me 5 pictures. When he came to the picture of me taken by the surveillance camera at the bank, I said no. He looked at me and then at the picture and then at his partner. He said, "This one looks like you, unless you have a twin." He nodded his head. He reached into his side pocket and took out a paper with an envelope and the note I had left at the bank. Then one officer said, "Is this yours? It has your fingerprints on it." I stopped him and told him I needed to talk to a lawyer. I was in the City of Industries jail for 1 week. I was kept there so that the police from other cities could come by to see if I fit the description of any of the suspects from any other crimes. I was transferred to the Old County Jail, which is the Hall of Justice jail. It was across from the new federal court building. The HOJJ is a very old building. You're always locked down 24/7. The only time I was out was during showers, roof time, or when they let me play handball, which was only once a week. I went to court in January 1974. I was allowed to make a phone call. I called my mother and my father. I told them that I really did it to myself this time and that I probably wouldn't be seeing them for a while. I told them I loved them very much and that I hoped they could forgive me. They helped me get a lawyer and were supportive and loved me like always. Most of my visits there were from my mother or my father.